I just spent half an hour filming this, and then the footage turned out bad, so I had to do it all over again. That's the scariest part of this video. One of the main draws people have to the concept of horror is fear of the unknown. Much like how going up on a roller coaster is often more nerve-wracking than the drop itself, it plays on our anticipation, our fears for the worst possible outcome. Nothing could ever be as truly terrifying as what we imagine. During the early stages of the internet in the 1990s, there was so much that we didn't know about it. There was no rulebook, no set of expectations, just full anonymity. In the great vastness of the cyberspace, anyone could be out there doing anything for any reason, and we may never know why. This dynamic created an aura of ambiguity on the internet where you often couldn't tell if something was even real or fake. It just felt very weird and creepy. Many of these sites were unintentionally strange in this regard, but others caught on quite early and learned to capitalize on it. And today we're going to talk about some of the most unnerving websites of the 1990s and whatever became of them. One of my favorite examples is a website for something you've definitely heard of, called the Blair Witch Project. Released in 1999, this was by far one of the most innovative and groundbreaking indie films of its time. While it was by no means the first found footage movie, it certainly did popularize the genre within mainstream Hollywood. And it all had to do with how they marketed the film. You see, advertising for the Blair Witch Project wasn't your typical come see this scary movie type of ad. Instead, the movie was promoted through missing persons posters of the actors that were in the movie. The very premise of the movie is spelled out at the beginning, stating that a group of film students went missing in a small town in Maryland, and only their footage was found a year later. They were especially clever about this, as they used their real-life names as the names of their characters, making any kind of fact-checking much more ambiguous. The actors were even prohibited from doing interviews or any kind of public press for several months after the film's release, to create the illusion that they were in fact missing. The use of cheap camcorders and amateur equipment through the entirety of the film helped add to its realism. And of course, so did its website, BlairWitch.com. This site took the exact same approach as its regular advertising, indirectly promoting the movie through these fake missing persons inquiries, even telling people to contact their local police department if they have any information. Now, such a bold approach to advertising would probably not fly today, but the 90s were a different time, and this lack of information or frame of reference got people thinking, was the Blair Witch Project real? The families of the actors even got sympathy cards in the mail from the film's viewers. The Blair Witch Project website really paid attention to detail with this whole thing. Even the small things like naming the website BlairWitch.com as opposed to theblairwitchproject.com put more emphasis on the Blair Witch as a local legend rather than a website just dedicated to promoting the film. There were pages on the site dedicated to the actors in the film and all the public information about them. There was another page that showed alleged crime scene photos and ongoing police investigations regarding their disappearances, as well as a page all about the folklore itself and the Blair Witch's history throughout Maryland. The site also included a chat room where people could discuss the investigations and even their own findings. Some anecdotal stories even mention people planning their own trips to Maryland to search for the Blair Witch themselves. This, complemented by the mysterious, unnerving energy of the early internet, made BlairWitch.com a very disturbing website back in the 90s. It was basically one of the first online ARGs, short for alternate reality game, a game which incorporates real-life elements as clues. It was undeniably a brilliant marketing campaign, and it worked. The Blair Witch Project remains the most profitable indie horror film of all time. I mean, the profit margins on this film alone are insane. While the film itself proved to be a great success, The actors involved have unfortunately since come forward, detailing alleged mistreatment from the studio during the making of the film, and even several years after its release. But the massive success of this film could absolutely be attributed to the power of the internet, and the opportunity for the creators to use this lack of online precedent to their advantage. It showed that with anybody now having a voice in the world, the line between reality and an elaborate hoax was now blurred. This sentiment would only grow more powerful throughout the 90s as the internet became more popular. It was at that point where the public generally had basic access to the internet, but not enough to have a full grasp and understanding of the world. The idea that things once seen as impossible could now be publicly documented for the first time. Like time travel? Sounds a bit silly, but in 1998, a series of strange messages would start going around from someone known as John Titer. Titer? I hardly know her. Okay, let's just pay attention. Also going by the name timetravel_0, John Titer was a user who claimed to be from the year 2036 and worked for the US military. All his posts were primarily circulated on the website timetravelinstitute.com in the year 2000, though the John Titer mystery even predates being circulated online, as it was initially spread by fax machine on Art Bell's famous radio show, Coast to Coast AM. What was very convenient about Titer's storytelling was that it was basically unfalsifiable. He claimed that he was from an alternate version of the future. So if any predictions that he made ended up not coming true, he could just attribute it to this reason. The reason things didn't turn out the way he claimed is because he changed it. The butterfly effect. It was basically an early version of LARPing, live-action role-playing, and lots of people just played along with it. But then things started to happen that were a bit weird. Titer's posts and claims remained very consistent across the board over time. Part of his story was that he was a military officer stationed in Tampa, Florida, and that time travel was invented just 2 years prior, in 2034, by CERN, the same organization that created the World Wide Web. He then claimed that a nuclear war began in 2015, which has since led to American life becoming much more individualistic and family-centric, much of this dynamic strongly resembling the American Old West of the 19th century. Here's just a small list of some of Titer's predictions. Now obviously these things didn't happen, but again, it's only because Titer changed the timeline with his mere presence. It seemed like there was an alibi for pretty much everything. He then provided photos and blueprints of his time machine, which he installed in a 1966 Chevrolet Corvette. Very specific and reminiscent of Back to the Future. But not only that, these blueprints lay out the scientific process for how this time machine works, and pretty accurately followed some of the proposed theories of time travel that have been made in the past. He describes his time machine producing something called a Tipler sinusoid, which is based off the Tipler cylinder theory. In short, this theory suggests that if you were to rotate a very massive cylinder at an incredibly fast speed, it could effectively warp space-time by creating something called a frame dragging effect, which theoretically is what makes time travel possible. But again, this is just a theory, but it just shows how knowledgeable the person behind this was, especially during Y2K internet, where there wasn't nearly as much information readily available. But my personal favorite is Titer's posts detailing his main reason for going back in time. He was ordered by the US government to travel back to 1975 to obtain an IBM 5100 and use it to debug old legacy software to help solve an upcoming computer crisis. It is believed that Titer was likely referring to something known as the 2038 problem, which in Titer's timeline was only 2 years away. For those who don't know, the 2038 problem is basically the sequel to Y2K. In January of 2038, all 32-bit systems will essentially have their clocks get all messed up. These computers won't be able to tell the time correctly, will get things confused, and therefore cause great havoc. Now, what's so special and mysterious about some random 1970s computer? Well, the IBM 5100 had a very special feature. It was able to emulate programs both in BASIC for System 3 and APL for System 360. Keep in mind that most IBM mainframes still rely on 70s legacy code even today, and 2036 is not that far away. So the idea of this still being the case then isn't that ridiculous. So by debugging this old code, they could effectively solve the 2038 problem on all the mainframes from this time. But why grab a computer from 1975? Why not use an emulator on a computer from his time period? Or a computer from, 2000 and run something like Hercules? Well, someone on the forum actually does ask this question. Titer effectively states that these emulators just don't run as well as something that was built much more recently to that time, as people in 1975 had much more access to the infrastructure of all this code compared to someone from the 90s. And according to Titer, the nuclear war in his timeline effectively stunted technological development and made much of this old technology lost. Therefore, it made the most sense for him to go back in time and grab this specific computer. The only reason he was even in the year 2000 was because he wanted to grab some family photos that were lost in the war. The craziest part? This special feature in the IBM 5100 was not common knowledge, not even in 2000. This is because IBM engineers were required to sign NDAs regarding this feature because they didn't want IBM competition potentially taking advantage of it. This was all confirmed to be true by Bob Dubk, who was one of the engineers for the IBM 5100. So how the heck did John Titer know about it? There are three possibilities. One, he was a prankster that was just very knowledgeable about computers and learned about it somewhere, maybe even on the internet. It certainly wasn't common knowledge, but a handful of the most tech-savvy people did know about this in 2000. Two, it was a hoax created by a former IBM employee, which would explain knowing this very obscure information. Or three, he's a time traveler. He said so.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
The fact that John Titer incorporated these oddly specific and technically accurate elements lent a lot of credence to his claims. And during the ambiguous late 90s, early 2000s internet, a lot of people believed him. He made his final post in March of 2001, saying that he is going back to 2036, and people in the early 2000s are too headstrong, close-minded, and don't really care for one another, at least compared to in the future. They will pass by someone whose car is broken down on the side of the road because it's just not worth the trouble. If time travel is real, where are all the time travelers? Quite frankly, you all scare the hell out of me, and I'm sure other temporal drivers would feel the same. He ends his post with, "Bring a gas can with you when the car dies on the side of the road." Titer has not posted since, and his identity remains a mystery to this day. In order to talk about this next website, we first need to time travel back to the 1930s.
Hello?
Hello, operator. Can you give me the line to W.C. Fields at Universal?
Who's calling?
Why, this is Mr. Kaufman at Nation Squid Pictures. Whose number is this?
Well, what number are you calling?
You ought to pick up some new manners, hun. Fatigue, headaches, overpayments, unnecessary middlemen, outright impertinence. Dialing the phone shouldn't be a chore. Now, Mint Mobile is here to revolutionize the mobile phone industry. That's right, a telephone you can carry around in your pocket without a wire. And all plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network, including free calls to Mexico, Canada, and His Majesty's United Kingdom. You can even choose the amount of data you want each month, including unlimited, so that you know exactly what is right for you. Switching over from your current plan is easy. You can keep your phone number, all your existing contacts, and even bring your own device if you feel so inclined. And you don't even need to march down to the store to switch. It can all be done remotely in the comfort of your own home. All plans come with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. In fact, 96% of users rate themselves highly satisfied with Mint Mobile's customer care. Now your calls can be more like this.
Hello, is this Mrs. Hofstadt?
Oh, is that you, Myrtle?
Why, no, it's Midge. Hello.
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 Plans start at $15 a month. All you have to do is visit the link below and you can get started on a premium wireless plan. Mint Mobile. Make the phone calls of tomorrow, today.
I'm just kidding. We don't need to go back to the 30s. That was just for the ad. But just like how movie magic has been fooling people for decades, this smoke and mirrors trickery was also extended to the internet. And this is much easier when you target very spiritual and superstitious demographics. And that is when you get a little website called winkingjesus.com. When I say little, I mean little. Dating as far back as 1996, there is next to no surviving documentation of this website outside of barely working archive snapshots and some accounts from people who visited the site. But I thought it was just so strange that I had to talk about it. It is a website that claims to have a miraculous image of Jesus Christ, the most famous example being the Shroud of Turin. According to the website, this image of Jesus will occasionally and very quickly wink at the viewer, so quick that they may second guess that they even saw it, making it very unpredictable. How does it work? Well, it's very simple. It's an animated GIF, or a GIF if you're like me and also like to live dangerously. My name is Richard Cunningham, and this is my wife, Oprah. Yes, the whole thing was incredibly simplistic in nature, and the animation was programmed to only occur once. As you would have guessed, this is not a very common setting that GIFs usually have, as most of them are programmed to loop. But by making this only play a single time, you can potentially leave the viewer wondering if what they even saw was real. Obviously, nobody would fall for this today, and even in the 90s, GIFs were already a well-established technology. But picture yourself as someone in the 90s who's brand new to the internet, only used to seeing still images, knows nothing about how computers work, or even is religious and believes in miraculous icons. Combine this with that online ambiguity we've been talking about, and the suspension of disbelief becomes much more apparent. In fact, the website even includes testimonials from people who witnessed the winking themselves. It also includes an online shop, Jesus posters, a donation page, and a very strange page called Strip for Jesus, which includes comic strips talking about the website. This leads me to believe that this website is some sort of social experiment that's designed to be somewhat at the expense of devout religious people. It is a great example of the kind of irreverent, provocative sense of humor that was present in the 90s, especially in mass media like the internet. Today, winkingjesus.com no longer exists, but it definitely provides a snapshot to a time in online history that has seemed to disappear in the wink of an eye. That was terrible. But be careful. If you don't accept Jesus in your heart, you may just end up in hell. .com, much like the Blair Witch Project. This is another early example of an ARG-like setup. Much of this website is now lost, but from these surviving snapshots we have, we can get a glimpse of what it was like. Hell.com dates as far back as 1995, created by Kenneth Aronson, and is technically part of the deep web, as it started off as an invite-only website. It showed the Hell.com logo and a login page, and nothing more. Beyond that, the website was a mystery. It essentially gained recognition and became a novelty as a sort of anti-website. Its mere presence alone was meant to be ironic. But in 1997, the website would become a bit more open, adding a more animated version of their page, telling people to go home because it is invite-only. The fact page gives us info on what this site is about, detailing how access to the site is only available to those who received a horrifying email, typically for creative artists with a pretty established reputation. The idea was that they could freely express themselves, which was already common practice on 90s internet, but this time, they had the benefit of no public scrutiny. But as word of the website grew and internet technology got more advanced, they began hosting occasional art events, some pages including the new Flash animation technology. Some of these pages were introduced much later than in the 90s, but it goes to show the kind of novelty that this site ended up becoming. Here's an example of one of the events that they held, and the kind of art that it showcased. Most of it is pretty strange but innocuous stuff. And Hell.com is an early case of a concept website. Hell.com is no longer around in its original form, instead redirecting you to a Christian website, which I think is beautifully ironic. But I think the way it carried itself, its exclusivity, and how little was known about it, combined with its connotation with, well, hell, is what gave it such an unnerving presence. Honorable mentions include Mortis.com, a site that was registered in 1997 that only showed a login page that was so heavily encrypted that even the most advanced of hackers were unable to get past it. Although the earliest records of it date back to around 2012, when someone inspected the source code, they found that the site was hosting terabytes of data, one file alone being as high as 39 gigabytes. This is especially odd if this was the same setup it had in 1997, given how low online bandwidth was at that time. Either way, this website was in fact designed to do something. We just have no idea what it was, and that site also no longer exists. Sites like Hell.com and this one having a locked-off setup certainly helped in giving the deep web that creepy vibe that it still exhibits today. The idea that anything could be going on beyond this digital wall, and you have absolutely no idea what it is. Then, of course, there's my favorite part of the mysterious early internet, unexplained ghost media. In 1999, you have the launch of GhostStudy.com. It was a website ran by paranormal investigators who would post to their page supernatural photos sent in by their users. Now, obviously programs like Photoshop existed, and the very concept of doctoring a photo wasn't unheard of. But with lack of a reference point for past online events at this time, it made these things more believable. It is also important to consider that in the late 90s, computer hardware was much weaker, and so running sophisticated software of that caliber was more expensive, and therefore less common among everyday people. The concept of advanced photo and video manipulation was more associated with professional filmmakers, and the internet was, of course, seen more as a decentralized escape for the average Joe. So what could you expect to see on this now dead website? Well, every week, the site would post new ghost photos, and even put together the best ones of each month. It would even include the occasional paranormal video, which you could view in your computer's media player. They even included a ghost journal, documenting all their recent investigations, including one at the site of the Battle of Gettysburg, which I found very interesting. In the 90s, it was the perfect site to spend the late hours of the night surfing, not knowing if what you are looking at is even real, because the vastness and uncertainty of the internet has completely turned your understanding of the world upside down. There's so much out there. Things that you're just now discovering, things that you don't yet know, and things you'll never know. If you would like to learn more about the phenomenon of paranormal content on the early internet, you can check out my video on that right here. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters, patreon.com/nationsquid. And if you're feeling generous, you can always buy me a coffee, too. Thank you for watching, everyone.